The first place I want to start is that all energy, according to physics, is neither created or destroyed. It exists in a total matrix and is transformed. If you think of death, for example, the death of the human body, if you dig a hole in the ground and put a human body into the earth, slowly the microorganisms in the soil transform the blood into various forms of nitrogen, and healthy plants grow. And what was once the form of a body becomes a new form. In an ideal sense, it becomes healthy plants that live around it, or if it is consumed carnivorously, it refurbishes the bodies of those who consume it. This is useful in understanding and grappling with the paradigm of good and evil. If you think of just the simple linguistic mechanism of live and evil, you see kind of the polarity. Live is evil backwards, evil is live spelled backwards. And you kind of see that there's this direction. And we often think of evil as that which destroys that which is good. The second place I want to start is that the human mind is incapable of directly comprehending reality. The human mind creates systems overlaid upon the complexity of reality to understand the reality, and in doing so, in an incomplete fashion, by definition excludes part of reality. And if we imagine this as an infinite energy matrix, and the sphere in geometry is the shape that is in many ways unique and incredible in its ability to unify polarity, because the sphere is not only the representation of the totality, even space-time has a curved shape that kind of moves towards a spherical nature or a torus. The sphere is kind of the union of the paradox of masculine and feminine. Within geometry, the circle, the sphere, the curve is the feminine polarity, and the point or the line is the masculine polarity. And the sphere is unique because it is an infinite number of lines. If we digitally construct a sphere in a computer, we do it on a grid fashion, and on a sophisticated computer, we'll do it on a very dense grid, a lot of different pixels. But what we're really doing is we create a circle on this grid is on the matrix of pixels, on the matrix of energy. We're telling some to go, in this white backdrop, we're telling some to go dark as we go around, and we're reconstructing the one through thousands or millions or billions of dots, depending on the computer power. And the same is true when we create a circle through a refraction of lines. When we try to create a circle, and I saw this when I noticed in Brazil, where they carve crystals which are angular. Usually quartz is six-sided. And when they want to create crystal balls, they start cutting a series of lines, and they just keep cutting more and more refined lines until what emerges to the eye and to the touch is a circle, and then they begin polishing it in different grits. But a circle is an infinite number of lines. A sphere is an infinite number of planes that can be constructed by dots or lines. And so the feminine is created in the infinite expression of the masculine. And the masculine is created within the infinite womb of the feminine, which is the possibility field. Every masculine expression exists within the womb of the feminine because the feminine is the space of possibility in which the masculine is realized. If you have a line, this line exists in the space of the blackboard, which exists in the space of the room, which exists in the space of the house, which exists in the space of the community, which exists in the space of the country, of the planet, of the solar system, of the universe, of the multiverse. So every masculine expression exists within the space, within the space, which is the feminine expression in duality. And so the sphere rather nicely does a good job of it. It is both one. You can look at the sphere and say that's one. But one is unconscious. And, you know, if you just say everything, if you're trying to get to know someone, for example, and you say, what do you like? And they say, I like everything. You know absolutely nothing. And so you have to break the circle down into lines to have conscious intimacy, to have conscious intimacy. You see, you have to break the sphere into lines or dots. And when you break the sphere into dots, you could see this would be rather a crude sphere. We're not looking at millions of grids here. We're looking at a couple of hundred grids. And so this circle, you see how it curves in this area here? To really get that curve mathematically, you would need 10 smaller grids within each of these grids, and some of them would turn on and off to create that curvature. And so the sphere is this union, this coming together of the masculine and the feminine. It is one in its unconsciousness, and it is infinite in its masculine expression. But the infinite of the masculine is also unconscious. Every human thought is birthed within the conception of language. So if we do a little thought experiment right now, and you try and think a thought, which is another way to say be conscious of something. If I ask you to be conscious of something, you have to view what you are conscious of through language. Now, it's not that plenty of things don't exist outside of language. In fact, the vast majority of totality lies in the unconscious, which by definition is 99.9% bigger than the conscious. The feminine is 99.9% bigger than the masculine. And whether we look at the fractal pattern of language and what people who understand 5 or 6 different languages will tell you, and recognize more clearly than myself, who only speaks English, is that if you can speak Latin, you can think of a language map, because no language is perfectly symmetrical. You can think of a language map as a series of lines that intersect one another. And so you have a word here, and you have a word here, and you have a word here at the intersection of different words. So all consciousness is self-referential. All language is self-referential. How do you know what cat is? Well, you say it's small. Well, how do you know what small is? Well, you hold a picture and say small and big, and you get a sense of a shape. But you have to know what a shape is, or this doesn't register. So language is self-referential. Thought is self-referential. We think through the lens of language. And so every language puts the intersection of reality in different patterns. So a word exists at each of these intersections, but it's not a symmetrical grid, is my point. For example, the Eskimos have 400 different words for snow because it's an important intersection of consciousness, because it intersects with their survival and their security and their love and belonging. So in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first one in the hierarchy is survival, then comes security, then comes love and belonging. Anything that intersects with a repetitive exposure or a repetitive influence with these three of the base human needs gets magnified. Why? Because pain is what magnifies. Pain teaches the faults in the system. So everything in the human mind is faulty because everything in the human mind is a heuristic representation of reality in a very small, in a very micro, on a grid that is incomplete. And you can kind of get the sense if you understand the geometry of the infinite half. So you say your increment is a meter. Why? See, there's another example of an intersection of language. So the Europeans say this is a meter. The meter doesn't exist in American mathematics. We say there's a yard. And as you can see, the yard is not quite the same distance as a meter. But there is also a card, and a liter, and a seater. You see, if you invent words, you can break up the infinite space on whatever grid you choose, as long as you can keep track of it. That's the problem. At a certain point in complexity, the code is so difficult to remember, to put back together, to member it. The pattern is so difficult to put back together that you are lost in the chaos of unconsciousness. When you start saying in your head, 3,000,002 divided by 2, okay, now we're at 1,000,000, so 1.6 million, and then times this and times this. If you keep doing these equations, most of us get lost very quickly, and where there's just a fog. I've lost the quantity of the equation. The equations were too complex. I want it simpler. 1 plus 1 plus 1, we can do that one, okay. We can count up to 9 and then start repeating to 1. So we call it a 10-base number system, but in many ways, you get to 9, and then the next one is 1 plus a 0. So it's a 9-base number system. And when I was in my teenage years, I designed a 13-point number system where I just invented 3 new symbols. So you'd count up to 9, and then there was symbol A, symbol B, and symbol C, and then it repeated. Now you get an interesting different mathematics, which it doesn't repeat every, at 9 it goes back to 1. At At 12, it goes back to 1. And so you have a different geometry using that number system. And the same is true with Latin, German, English, Chinese, is you're refracting the infinite feminine, the infinite sphere, using a different grid. And mathematics is pretty symmetrical, which is one of the reasons it's a true language. It's very difficult to hide or to lie in mathematics. And the reason is that a mathematician, if you with a straight face say, here's my equation, 2 plus 2 equals 480. They say, no, it doesn't. It equals 4. You say, no, it does. It does. I have a complicated equation. And you say, okay, let's put it in. So 2 marbles. Now let's add them to these 2 marbles and count them. Is there 480 or is there 4? And so it's you can't lie in mathematics. And that's really the beauty of mathematics, is because cults were invented to lie in order to maintain an irrational status quo in the face of change and complexity. One could think of the primary service of a cult, which we call culture. The primary service of a cult to its people is to disable consciousness by creating repetitive memes, whether they make sense or not, whether they add up or not, but we'll all do them. And it creates a certain illusion of safety through the repetitive certainty of irrational memes. Hello, how are you? I'm fine. Are you fine? What part of you is fine? What part of you is getting better? What part of you is getting worse? What part of you, if any, is staying the same? What does fine mean to you? Oh my goodness, this doesn't work at all. It doesn't work. But it works as an irrational equation that is not subjugated to mathematical rigor. I feel good. What does that mean? What does good mean to you? Well, I don't know, but I thought that was the thing to say. Does your leg feel good? It's a bit wonky. Okay, so when you say you feel good, you weren't thinking of your leg. Can we change the subject? And so a tremendous amount of cult interaction is utter and complete nonsense that is mathematically unsubstantiable in any analysis. And the only way we can maintain that degree of nonsense is to not question it. We cannot examine the interaction under a mathematical lens, or it falls apart. You quickly learn that one person's definition of fine is, they say that to be polite. The next person's definition of fine is when some part of them is doing fine and they want to be positive. And the next person's definition of fine is if a majority is doing fine. And then the next person's definition of fine is if every part of them is doing well that they're thinking about at that time. But then you quickly learn that what fine, even if every part of the person is doing fine, you quickly learn that what that means is that in the moment of time in which the question is being asked, the intersection of reality with the heuristic overlay of our map of reality seems relatively congruent. And so if you have a paradigm, for example, and we as conscious minds have very limited and unsophisticated paradigms, if you have a paradigm, then let's say you have the idea that true north is good, or whatever it is, fight for your rights, true north is good, love is always wonderful, whatever it is. So you have your paradigm. And then from time to time in the revolution of the possibility field of reality, things will line up with your paradigm. And it'll be like, yes, this is it. We finally made it, right? And as change occurs, it will then misalign with the paradigm, because reality is not faulty. The paradigm that measures the reality that is capable of being conceived within the framework of the conscious mind is too simplistic, too asymmetrical, and thus is incorrect. And so I want to kind of go through the mathematics of this process. So we've created our circle. So there's the totality that exists, which one could call the larger feminine space of the totality. That's an ideal, meaning we can't even begin to grasp it, because 99.99% of reality is not only unknown, it is unknown. It's the vast, unimaginable space of possibility. All of possibility does not fit within any human being's imagination. I never thought of that. Could be said for 99.99% of reality. Now, we're able to ignore that mathematical truth by staying in a very small revolution, in a very familiar, simple set of variables. So, for example, I'm in my house right now. So I look around and I think I know all of it. There's nothing I see that's unknown, because I'm in my house again and again and again and again and again and again and again. So I look around and it's all familiar. So I think I know a lot, because I'm staying in a very, very small subset of reality. And I talk English and I think I know all these words. But that's just because we're talking English. As soon as you start talking Japanese and saying these exact same ideas in Japanese or Chinese or Latin or anything, I know nothing again. So I talk English because that's all I know. I stay in my house because I feel comfortable, because I know it. I relate to a very few people who I know very well. And so in my world, I'm bristling with knowledge, right? When I know less than 1% of 1% of 1% of all there is to know. And as an individual ego consciousness, we all have a need for a certain amount of certainty. We all need certainty. This is mama's skirts and knowing where home is and coming back, to the familiar cult terrain. And then as soon as we have certainty, hedonic adaptation kicks in, we get bored, and then we want variety. And then the world is so vast, we get way too much variety if we're, have the guts to actually go out into the universe in any meaningful way. We get a lot of variety, and then we come back for certainty again. So we're looking to kind of health or symmetry or well-being or wholeness is the balance of these paradoxes. And because we are very, 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 very tiny as a consciousness and as a body, we can't go off into infinity for a few thousand years and then balance that with total certainty and a minuteness for a few thousand years. Then we say, oh, we're at ease. Because we're too small. There's a sense of the circumference of the ego's lens. And here's a good way to experience it, which is that you can distinguish thumb, finger, this, ring, this, board. You've got distinction. You've got perspective, right? And so this is all fine. And of course, you've got even more perspective because you don't spend all your time listening to me and this video. Then you've got even more perspective because there's stuff happening outside your screen. But imagine that the ego is this little box here. If you imagine that everything you know is limited to what's within this little box, that means out here, of course it exists, but you don't know it. And you don't know out here, and you don't know out here, and you don't know out here. You don't know this. But you still feel pretty comfortable because you've got contrast and distinction. You see, unconsciousness occurs when you lose distinction. Now, this is called trauma. When the ego feels that its existence on a dimension or as a totality is compromised. The ego feels that its existence is compromised. See, because it is the one who measures reality when it loses distinction. So watch what this happens. This is you, the ego. And an object comes closer and closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. This is called timeless horror. You've still got some gradients and stuff like that. And you notice how you were out of focus. This is terrifying for a traumatized species, for a traumatized culture, for a traumatized family to experience. Timeless, wordless, boundless, unknown. It's the exposure to the infinite feminine. And every one of us as children in a parentally illiterate cult, I'm using illiterate for a lot of different things, but I'm just talking about ignorance. We have centuries of intergenerational abuse patterns, and we know that they perpetuate in one form or another until they're dealt with. So we have centuries of intergenerational abuse patterns. High rates of incest, high rates of violence, high rates of shame, high rates of dishonor, lack of language. There's just so much that we don't know as we thrust our children into giant worlds. And what this means is that every child in our cult has had a number of experiences where the world was vast and sociopathic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, when you're 2 feet long and weigh 20 pounds or 10 pounds, everything in the world is giant. Not just the visual things, not just the bodies that pick you up carelessly or toss you around or, joggle you or burp you or whatever. These things are giant. But the sounds are giant. The shapes are too fast to there's no language. Now, when you have a parentally illiterate cult that pretty much says that whatever goes on in childhood is fine, they'll get over it. That's pretty much how we manage a great deal of the psyche in childhood. I'll do what was done to me, and since I'm here, presumably they will survive in one form or another. So you're 2 years old, and these giants stick you on a table, and the TV is blaring violent machine guns at 3 times the volume your ears can hear. And a light flashes as this happens, and then there's laughter over here, and you're terrified. But it doesn't occur to a single person in the room that you might be terrified by experiencing the world 700% louder than they are. Because to create the similar experience for that today, you'd have to have 40-foot giants that weigh several tons with lights and light bulbs that are 5 times brighter than anything that we're familiar with, and sounds that jar and rattle and bang, and then you have to have racing people rushing around at 60 miles an hour relative, and then you're terrified and you try and speak, but you cannot say anything. And everyone ignores you as you go into shock and terror, shock and terror, shock and terror, and cry out for help. And if you cry out for help, maybe they hit you or take you into the next room and tell you to be quiet, and they just leave you there to scream yourself into oblivion. Well, that's a lot of trauma. That's a lot of awareness of how big the world is. And one of the things that goes on in repeatedly violated children is they're dwarfed with the overwhelming awareness of helplessness, this sense of helplessness. I don't know when, it just feels like an eternity before mom's back. And when she's back, she's not aware that I'm terrified. She's oblivious. She's talking on her phone, doing this and that. And it's like, don't you understand what a big deal this is for me? And there's oblivion in a parentally illiterate cult. Now, when you understand that no one can see you, that no one cares enough about you to see you, that no one sees you enough to understand, that no one understands you enough to empathize, and that no one empathizes enough to attune to you. You know, there is a meltdown that goes on in the tantrum of the child. It's like, get me the fuck out of this sociopathic world. I'm in a world with giants who do not see me, who do not know me, who do not love me, and who seem to be going out of their way to do all kinds of things that are not what I need, and to not do the few things that I desperately need. And we have fits. And in the middle of these fits, we often come across a concept that we formulate, which is, I'm going to grow up, and then I'm never going to be helpless again. I'm never going to go into this unknown place again. People are cruel. People are sociopathic. They're morons. I am not going to trust or need people. Now, of course, this is a big disaster in psychology, because we are growing up in an ecological framework where we depend implicitly on millions of people to not do certain things. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're in an age where any one of 5 million people could kill your whole neighborhood easily. So the fact that we exist is predicated on 5 million individuals each deciding that for whatever reason they're not going to blow up your neighborhood, because it wouldn't be hard to do. You can ride up and down with a few machine guns and have the whole neighborhood blown up before the police arrive. You can poison the water supply at the local reservoir before anyone realizes it, and one drink and you're dead. You can drop a nuclear bomb. You can do There are so many ways to kill thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of people. And we are dependent on millions upon millions of people deciding not to do that. So that's we're dependent on them not doing that, even as we push one human being after another to their limit. We traumatize the shit out of our population, humiliate them, shame them, let them know that they're not worth more than their money. So if they don't have any money, they can be on the streets for all we care, because they're not important, their money is. We traumatize the shit out of people from cradle to grave. And we desperately depend on every one of those millions of people that we're fucking up not deciding to take revenge, to destroy the system that is hurting them, which are cult systems. Because the ego is a fractal microcosm of the cult in which it was born. So consciousness is refracted through language. So going back to this thing, you can see that this language is more complex than this language because it has more intersections. But you see, this word and this word are pretty similar in this particular matrix of possibility. This word and this word are almost identical. But see, this culture has a word here, and this culture doesn't. So there are words that you will find in Danish, for example. I think one is called hung, and it's the warm, cozy place of a fire. I'm sure I pronounced it wrong because I don't speak Danish. But the point is that every cult has its own intersections, its density of intersection, and then also each person has that because I speak English. But there are over 20,000 words in the English language that I don't know their meaning because they're not in common parlance. So we have certain intersections for things that we haven't gotten around to learning. Why? Because they didn't seem relevant to survival, security, love, and belonging. And when a cult is dealing, when its individuals are dealing with survival, security, love, and belonging, for example, a majority of Americans do not feel secure at level 3 of their hierarchy of needs. Meaning a majority of Americans are struggling to survive or feel secure in their survival or feel a sense of love and belonging, or all three. And every American has certain parts of them that are threatened daily, have no security, and are hated rather than loved and welcomed. So even when the overall personality is surviving with some degree of security and some part of them is love and belonging. For example, the United States hates weakness as a cult. So if you break down into helpless tears, which is part of the psyche, meaning if you get to know the full map of the human psyche, you will encounter a part of yourself. One of these grids is called desperate, helpless tears. And in our cult, we produce plenty of things that stimulate desperate helplessness with the physiological release of tears. So we stimulate this part of the psyche, but we don't welcome it into the cult. So it's kind of like musical chairs, where the cult has decided that there is not room for the full psyche at the table. So you've got 10 parts, and this is a very, very, very sophisticated culture. We're not talking about the US. So you've got 10 parts, but the cult has 9 chairs for you, which means that when the music stops and everyone seeks a resting place, there's going to be 10% of you in a very sophisticated cult that has no place to go. In Rumi's terms, it would be the uninvited guest. And in Sleeping Beauty, this is the aunt that doesn't get the invitation to the christening. The old woman, she's called a witch because the witch represents that which is uninvited. But it's really a grid point on the psyche. We burned witches at the stake. What we were saying is that the intuitive, feminine, more nature-based form of consciousness was not welcome in the cult. We're afraid of it. We don't understand it. It doesn't fit within the cult. And so we cast that out. The one we don't invite to the party is the old witch. And of course she's a woman. Because in a chauvinistic cult, evil is represented in the feminine. So she's cast out. And what happens in the story of Sleeping Beauty is Sleeping Beauty goes to sleep for 100 years. When the old witch shows up uninvited and offers a curse to Sleeping Beauty. Now, the way a cult hears this narrative is, here we are, this loving cult, we're all perfect, it's wonderful. You see, there have been 10,000 cults in human history, and every single cult has thought that they were wonderful. Ask Americans, are they the best and wonderful cult in the world? Absolutely. Everyone should be like us. Well, the thing is, every single cult in human history has said the same thing. Now, one has to be a little bit dense to not figure out that at least some of those cults are lying. Because if there's really one best way, and it's yours, right? Because I'm right, and that means other people who disagree with me are wrong. we are right, and that means other countries that do it differently, they're wrong. They don't know as much as we do, obviously. And of course, we don't know as much as they do, but why would we want to? Because all the stuff that we don't know is unimportant, and because it's not ours, right? And so, Jonathan Haidt talked about the righteous mind, even within the Democrats and the Republicans. And, I really enjoy the fact that as a Democrat, he concluded scientifically that Republicans had a more sophisticated value structure than Democrats. Because Republicans value freedom, they value human rights, they value they value rights and freedom and diversity, but they also value tradition and religious values. So the Democrats are always focused on injustice and freedom and rights for minorities, etc. But they are not fighting for tradition, and they're not fighting for religious tradition and family in the same way. Whereas Republicans value freedom and stuff, but when it conflicts with tradition, and when it conflicts with religion, and when it conflicts with family, they choose, in the circumstance, sometimes they value individual rights, and then sometimes they value the tradition more. And the mistake of the Democrats, according to Jonathan Haidt, is that when a Republican says no to a right or a freedom, and says yes to a tradition or a family or a religious something, that the Democrats do not have a sophisticated enough, or the liberals do not have a sophisticated enough paradigm to understand that the Republicans are voting for something. Because in their pattern, they've got someone's losing their freedom, someone's losing their right. There's an injustice, right? But they don't value the tradition. And so if there's a tension between tradition and right, the Democrat will always vote, or the liberal will vote for the right. But the conservative may vote for the tradition, which is a dishonored God among liberals. And so it's nothing. And so then they conclude that the conservative does not value freedom, rather than concluding that they do not value tradition. Because in their paradigm, tradition has no value. It's all about freedom, right to choose, the this, the that. Everyone should do, march in the streets. We have the right to have Blue Hair Day. We have the right to walk around naked. We have the right, and so, but it's a limited scope, and the other side isn't honored. Well, every cult. We're not, that's just the myopia within the United States. Every cult in human history has valued certain things at the expense of other things. And so in this paradigm, the intuitive, the magical, the earth-based, the older woman is cast out of the cult. And rather than having the decency, because cults very rarely show up their own inadequacies, because their primary goal is certainty through self-perpetuation. The goal of the cult does not acknowledge its inadequacy. So what it does is it turns what it lacks the sophistication to honor into a derogatory term, the old witch. Now, who would want to invite an old witch to the party? You don't want her to show up. She's that crazy relative that you want to pretend never existed. Now, there's an interesting intergenerational abuse correlation here. It's been shown in various psychological studies that children carry the energy of the dishonored relatives and dishonored events in their past. For example, one woman couldn't understand why she wanted to hurl herself into a liquid vat of steel at the steel mill that she was working at. She kept having fantasies of throwing herself into the steel furnace. And she thought that she wanted to die by furnace. But as it turned out, in doing some therapeutic work and digging around this constant fantasy to die in a hot gas chamber, it turned out that her parents had not told her that her grandparents died in the Auschwitz gas chambers because they didn't want to upset her, right? And so there's a dishonored, highly charged event in the family system that has gone on unconscious because everyone has agreed to glass it over, to bury that part of the energy field. But in order for a family system to evolve and integrate and heal, it has to deal with the residue, which it could be called the totals from past events. So in a mathematical equation, if in the past 2 million was combined with 4 million to create 6 million, and it doesn't fit very nicely in the cult. The cult doesn't like hearing about 6 million units of energy in that arena. So the 6 million that was created is buried underground. It's buried in the unconscious of the family psyche. Everyone agrees not to talk, but there are 6 million units of energy that have been configured in a particular way from a series of past events that are having influence. They're having gravitational pull around every person in the family, whether they talk about it or not. Well, she's in a family that won't talk about one of the highest charged events in the family's history. Grandparents burned alive by other human beings. And she has this desire to throw herself into the furnace of the steel mill. Now, once it came to light and she became conscious that it was her grandmother and grandfather who had been burned alive in Auschwitz, the rapport with the image differentiated itself from her personally. So now this constant recurring fantasy, and there's an interesting thing with imagination. What you imagine intensely and repetitively, one comes to desire. It's just the way psychology and biology works. What you imagine intensely and repetitively, you come to desire. If it's a painful thing that you imagine, you try and get it over with. You've probably watched horror movies where, it's so irritating, right? They send this sweet little 6-year-old in a nice blonde nightie with blonde hair. And, when there's a rumbling in the cellar, it's like, oh yeah, let's go down alone as a 6-year-old and let's split up, right? And, in the music gets worse, and you just have all these imaginations. Is she going to be slit in the throat? Is it a ghost? What's going to terrify the shit out of this kind of dumb 6-year-old? And we're angry at her. What are you thinking going in the cellar? And then the suspense builds. It's like, get it over with, kill the bitch, just get it over with. We desire what we intensely imagine, even if it's very painful, because we want to get it over with. It's like, just kill her, grab her. I don't like the suspense. I don't want the unknown horror, and so you may notice that in a movie context, the person who is, it's like they're so dumb, right? Don't they know that that's the very person that's going to kill them a few scenes from now? It's such a setup. Everyone can see it's coming. Why is she being nice to her murderer? and being polite. Doesn't she realize she should run for her life? But no, let's have a relaxing thing and put a blindfold on and say, you know, as the music darkens, you know, oh, it's so nice to feel safe here. You know, we get mad at that. And so, you know, in the same way, this woman intensely imagined the horrific events in her family's history that were being sealed over by everyone in her family, because we don't understand psychology. We don't understand that no energy is created or destroyed. If that amount of pain is created as innocence and trust is betrayed by sociopathic cruelty in the form, in this case, of the Nazis, that energy is there until we do something with it. If we take dirt and mix it with concrete and pack it together and make bricks, there's no dirt and concrete anymore. There are now bricks. And we have to deal with the bricks. We either have to build something with them. If we bury them, they're still bricks. And something got turned, there's something lost. Dirt was lost. Now there's bricks. So innocence and trust was lost. You know, two races, the Jews and the Germans living together, that was lost. What was created instead was a Holocaust. And so she stopped wanting to die and throw herself into the furnace as soon as she came to terms with the fact that what she was picking up on in the family system was the repressed, denied lies of her parents, trying to protect her from the truth. And so this is in Sleeping Beauty. This is what's going on. In Sleeping Beauty, they don't want to invite the old witch. They don't want the politically incorrect member of energy to be present in the official cult-sanctioned ritual. Devil be gone, you know, whatever. Whatever's outside the cult is the dishonored guest. But here's the thing. Every deeply charged object in the family and the culture's history is there at the christening. It doesn't matter if you don't send an invitation to the old witch. That feminine, intuitive, plant-based energy is still part of the psyche, and so it comes anyway. However, it is an uninvited guest. It is excluded from the circle. So here's our circle here. We've created this circle. And this is the first exclusion. So this circle represents all possibility that human beings can imagine, right? You may not agree with the Japanese, but you can say, well, they have weird hats when they're doing this and that, but that's, I can imagine that. It's just not me, right? So this is kind of the total possibility that's we're capable of consciousness, which is a very, very tiny. If we had an infinitely large blackboard, this grid would go off in infinite directions and in infinite distinctions, not just the limits of my ability to draw in a hurry. But that's not our cult. Our cult is within the limited circle of human consciousness. It looks something like this. Okay, so this is our cult. And we're being quite generous here because it looks like this is taking up about, a little more than 50% of all possibility. And in fact, every cult in 10,000 cults in human history has taken up a very small fraction of the psyche. But you do see the inevitable structural weakness of this geometry, and you also see it's not symmetrical. It's weighted a little bit more towards the bottom. It's not a symmetrical shape. and few cults are. Because when you get symmetry, you get grace. When you get asymmetry and simplicity, you get a bumpy ride. So the amount of suffering, particularly unnecessary suffering that goes on in a cult, in a framework's experience, is determined by the simplicity and asymmetry of a cult. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. If you think of life as a revolution, as a spiral movement forward, that life on the planet is the Earth going round and round the sun and then spinning in a way that brings sunlight and light, and both the sunlight and darkness, the night and the day, both bring life. The night brings calm and sleep, the day brings heat and light and all that. So you have these circular processes in life. And when you drive a car forward, you have a circular process. Your four wheels go forward. Now, when you have something approaching a circle or approaching a sphere, the ride is relatively smooth as it can be. But if you drive on triangles rather than circles, you drive on a triangle at 20 miles an hour and you are in trauma. All the wheels going up and down this. You can't think and concentrate, so you're going to go very slowly, and it's still going to be a painful ride driving on triangles. Well, this speaks to the correlation between symmetry and grace. Grace being the ease with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Asymmetry or dis-ease being the difficulty. So you get forward motion with triangular wheels. It's just every single turn is a pain in the neck, literally. And so you would have a pretty bumpy ride if you had your axis here and you go through revolutions of this shape. So you have all of the possibility that you can imagine, and then your cult is a simplified asymmetrical shape within that possibility field. And every cult in human history has been, to one degree or another, a bumpy ride. Now, there are plenty of cults that are far more intelligent than our own, meaning for the same energy expenditure, they created a significantly more human well-being and much less suffering. Our cult is one of the most inefficient cults in human history. It takes, to create an American lifetime, generates 102 tons of garbage in the landfill or incinerator, 90,000 gallons of gas consumed in a variety of ripple effects of the products and transportation of products and stuff used in manufacturing, 1,500 tons of CO2, a significant number of trees cut, $400,000 to raise a child. So there is a tremendous energy expenditure on an American life. And there is a correlation between the 102 tons of garbage generated in a landfill or in an incinerator at the end of an American life, and the 102 tons of mental and emotional garbage that an American will generate. There's usually a correlation between heart, mind, and body. So if you're generating, for example, I weigh 170 pounds. So you think of, for 175 pounds, using my cult's intelligence, my cult's paradigm, I'm generating 102 tons of garbage. So we're dealing with thousands of times more weight than the body itself. And then we look at what is garbage. Well, garbage is a word in the English language. And it means that which is no longer wanted. And you think about that for a moment. We spend large amounts of energy to take natural resources and turn it into a form that is no longer wanted. And we call that form garbage. Now, there is no garbage in the matrix of possibility. It does not exist. But in the human framework of consciousness, Garbage is that which this level of consciousness is capable of generating and incapable of seeing value in. So that's another way of looking at it. So if we invert this a little bit, we would see that the Western mind is a garbage-generating mind, which means it is a garbage mind. Because intelligence can be measured by the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. Now, the more waste that is generated in the process of creating well-being, the more inefficient the system. And the system is the paradigm. And the paradigm comes from the cult. So we could say that the American cult is one of the most unintelligent cults in human history, because it consumes more energy per capita than almost any other cult in the history of the planet. And most of that energy ends up in a form that we do not know what to do with. Einstein says that the level of consciousness that creates a problem cannot solve the problem it creates. So the level of consciousness that invents the idea of garbage, which is just an idea, it doesn't exist. Because outside the cult framework, outside the simplified version of language, there is no energy that does not have a valuable use for something and is thus not as valuable in the abstract as every other unit of energy. There is no person who is more valuable than another person in the abstract. But as we refract that abstraction down within the cult paradigm, we've decided that this is more valuable than this. And then we've decided that because this is on the other side of the value line, we don't want it. And then we've decided that because we don't want it, there is no use for it. And then we've decided that because there is no use for it, we're going to stick it in a hole or burn it. We are turning large amounts of energy into something we don't know what to do with. And rather than acknowledging the limitation of consciousness, we're pretending that there's a limitation in the energy that we don't know what to do with. And we're covering that faulty mathematics with the word garbage, which the Native Americans didn't have. You know, when the earth is your mother, and everything comes from the mother and everything goes back to the mother, there's no garbage. And if you look at the Native American lifestyle, when a Native American person died, if nothing was done with their possessions, nothing, let's say a whole tribe was just taken off the face of the earth. So there were some deerskin teepees, there were some poles, some skins, some animal teeth, some bison drying, whatever. 5 years from now, it's all become useful energy again. And if the Native Americans laid down in a field and died, the grass was greener. The coyotes were healthier after eating the flesh and after the bones wore down, etc., and the grass absorbed some of the blood and all that. There was no garbage. Everything was sacred. You advance 500 years and on the same land, one person generates 102 tons of stuff that we've invented, meaning it wasn't garbage before we arrived. Human beings took valuable natural resources, transformed it into something that they didn't know what to do with, and said, okay, we'll dig a big hole. And then we don't want the hole either. We don't want landfills in our backyard. We want someone else to do them. So we're going to create garbage, meaning nobody wants a landfill, so that's garbage. So we're going to create giant areas of land that everyone thinks of as bad areas of land to fill with what everyone thinks is bad stuff that nobody wants to deal with. And that's our level of cult intelligence. It is less sophisticated than our ancestors on the same land. And this is a good example of cult dogma. Because when Europeans came over to the Indians, they could have learned how to eliminate garbage. And they could have learned how everything was one and sacred. They could have done that. But they had the idea of garbage so stuck in their head that when the Native Americans were different from them, they didn't know what to do with them. And that's really what garbage is. It's a synthetic concept that only exists in human minds that describes that which we lack the imagination to know what to do with. And we didn't know what to do with the Native Americans, so we thought we'd kill them and call them garbage. In this case, savages. So I know we don't know what to do with them. Let's first invent the word savage. Okay? You're all savages. And then let's say, do we want to be people like us or do we want savages? We say, we're better. So what do we do with the garbage that we've just defined? Let's kill it. Negotiate with it, trick it, get it sick, kill it. Break our treaties with it. Whatever it is, just get rid of it because it's different and we lack the sophistication to engage with it. And so we turned a people who were more competent than we are on a number of metrics that we lacked the sophistication to understand. And so we're now suffering the cruelty from having buried and killed in both language and literally the ideas and the people who had already solved the problem we haven't yet fully grasped. Because most of us, it never occurs to us that the real problem is one of thinking. That you have to be suspect of a cult that is capable of producing something that it doesn't know what to do with. And rather than throwing the cult out, because it's obviously inferior, we throw the things that we don't know what to do with out, just like we do with our homeless, with our abused children, with our rape survivors, with our trauma survivors, with our mentally ill. You know, Hitler started the genocide in Germany, killing 70,000 German disabled children, would be a short way of saying it. So Hitler rounded up all the disabled children in Germany and gassed them. Because Hitler learned from his father that anything imperfect in him was unlovable and had to be exterminated. Alice Miller goes into some of this with, the drama, The Gifted Child, For Your Own Good, and various things, the psychology of traumatic parenting in Germany at the time. So Hitler's parents took every imperfect, politically incorrect part of Hitler and beat the shit out of it, humiliated the shit out of it, tried to kill it. And so Hitler desperately tried to develop some part of himself that he thought was perfect. And obviously he succeeded to some degree. But having learned that this is what you do with the unwanted parts of the psyche, he then externalized it and looked out and said, well, what's the imperfect parts of my country? Disabled children. When I cried, when I couldn't do it this fast enough, my father hit me and told me I was useless and he wished I'd never been born. Well, now I have the chance to rectify the situation. So Hitler gassed and burned 70,000 Germans who were imperfect. And that worked so well that he then turned his attention to who was the imperfect race, which, of course, happened to be, hereditarily partly his own. Because this is the child's dilemma in a traumatic family. Now, psychohistory, the history of psychology in the movement of mass events, is a tremendously valuable science. But it doesn't fit within our cult, which is committed to burying the cult wounds, the historical wounds, the family wounds. To be nice, because that's our idea of being nice. We don't tell our children the substantive events that affect their lives day in and day out that don't seem nice. We shut up. And there's an uninvited guest. Now, in Sleeping Beauty, there's a metaphor here. Now, we pretend that in the story that the old witch is an evil, horrible person. And the reason we didn't invite her is because she ruins everything, right? That's always the politically correct narrative. Those heathen black people, molesting our innocent girls, whatever the story is. Whatever we exclude, we villainize. Sam Keen wrote a book called Faces of the Enemy. If we're going to go to war with someone, we always begin by dehumanizing them. And having dehumanized them, we villainize them and characterize them to these little caricatures of a thing. And then we attack the caricatures while we're slaying human beings. Because, it was interesting. One of our CIA officials gave a talk in San Diego about the fact that the Russians were very, very, very meticulous and good about keeping their end of the treaties. And that while the United States betrayed its treaties, broke its treaties, lied, didn't own up, didn't pay its... For example, the United States was supposed to pay some reparations to Vietnam as part of the peace deal. It never paid up. There were billions of dollars. The U.S. president said they would pay the Vietnamese for burning their women and children in their country alive with napalm. They just never paid up. But in the dominant cult writes the history paradigm, the U.S. doesn't own its shadow. It doesn't own the cost to its country, to its young men, to the women and children, to humanity, to the environment, and doesn't pay keep its agreement. It's a deadbeat dad, in other words. But this is outrageous. The cult gets furious with these truths. So it turned out that the Russians kept more treaties more reliably than the Americans. But they're the bad ones, right? We got to kill them. And so the CIA operative said that he had the sense that people were more upset by hearing this part of the reality than they would be hearing if the Russians were invading. Because if the Russians were invading, that fit their paradigm that the Russians were these horrible, evil people. But hearing that the U.S. was more of a deadbeat dad when it came to treaties than Russia didn't fit the culturally sanctioned narrative. So they wanted to kill him, for upsetting their version of reality, basically. And so here you have the uninvited aunt in the story of Sleeping Beauty. And as it's told, she casts a curse. But that's not what happens mathematically. Because let's look at this system here. Now, the first thing to understand about a system is it's not reality. Systems are heuristic maps of reality. And the purpose, like a Google map, is to be comprehensible to the limited consciousness of the human brain. What do I mean? If you look on Google Maps, it's not reality. You don't see trees on Google Maps. You don't see every little thing. You don't see, You don't smell. If you smell the Google map, it doesn't smell like the pine forest that the road is going through. Google Maps is a heuristic model of streets at a simplified enough level that our brain can grasp it. And that's its purpose. Because if you had to describe every atom on the way to a destination, you'd forget after about 200 to 300 atoms. And you'd only be half an inch. So we need a simplified version. Just tell me to go right or left at Huckabee Street. I don't want to say go through 3,000 pebbles, then follow the crack in the concrete, then veer 38.5 degrees. It's too complicated. I want a simple version of reality that I can fit inside my mind. So I want to turn right at Huckabee Street and then tell me what to do next then, because I can't remember more than that. And so our maps of reality are not reality. Our language is not reality. It's a guide through the parts of reality we are sophisticated enough to recognize. And there are large portions, going back to the Eskimos. Why do they have 400 words for snow when we have one, snow? 400 words. Because in the Arctic, the difference between 10% snow this way and 10% snow that way is the difference between life and death for a 4-hour journey. So it is essential to know the word for snow that is sleet mixed with 20% ice that is rising towards melting point, rather than sleet with 20% formation of ice that is cooling towards brittleness. Because that one distinction means the difference between life and death for an Eskimo. So 400 words for snow. You infuse a grid of nuanced consciousness in the domains that affect life for you and your people. We're happy. It's snowing. That's good enough for me. If we're a skier, we're a little bit more interested. Not 400 words interested, but we're interested to know, is it powder? Is it this? Is it what's the temperature? We're interested in what affects skiing. But the Eskimos had a lot more to worry about. So in a mathematical formula, reality is organic, holographic, and ecological. What do I mean? This turtleneck is not my turtleneck. Why? I'm the one that pressed buy with one click. Why isn't it my turtleneck? Why isn't this my necklace? Well, in our very truncated version of consciousness, I can say this is mine, right? But if we look at it ecologically, this turtleneck is here because millions of human beings over hundreds of years, which developed over millions and billions of years, all existed. And if any one of those things didn't happen, this turtleneck doesn't exist. So there is a link between this turtleneck and the beginning of the planet. Meaning the little primordial fluid doesn't happen, this turtleneck doesn't happen. And we don't get how many millions of people are participating in our turtleneck. There was the development of the color spectrum. When Magellan came to America, the color blue wasn't yet, I think it was the Red Sea. They called it the Red Sea because they hadn't gotten the concept of blue yet. And they couldn't see the big ships. They could only see the little rowboats that looked like canoes coming out, and so they couldn't grasp it. So there's a development in consciousness just to comprehend the full color spectrum. And then there's a development of language before we could order a red one and know what red meant. And then there are people, of course, who are colorblind, who see a different version of red than I see and that you see, and that don't know that and don't know that they don't know. But then there was the cotton industry. Well, cotton had to evolve. for millions of years before, and then it had to be farmed. And see, if any one of those threads is broken, this doesn't exist. Back in the day when they were deciding between flax and cotton or silkworms and cotton, if they'd gone another way, it doesn't exist. William Randolph Hearst played a large part in the switch from hemp paper to trees. And the reason was that he owned some large forests, and hemp was a superior material for paper, and also superior in a variety of things, including aspects of clothing. But Hearst figured out that the best way to get the most price for his lumber would be to ban hemp, so that paper had to be made from trees. And then who had the big forest? Well, he did. And since he had a newspaper and was narcissistic and self-centered enough to condemn several generations of people to an inferior product and malign just so that he could, get rich off of trees through the influence of his newspapers, well, thus we have the banning of hemp and large sections of deforestation, which could be linked to William Randolph Hearst, just one of many abuses of power in human history. But there are so many things. Shipping containers, the idea of transporting things and making them abroad, internet technology. You see how many this turtleneck links to the entire universe. Do you know that the gravitational constant in this turtleneck is the same as the gravitational constant in a star 2 billion light years away? Meaning, if there was a way 2 billion light years away from here for the gravitational constant to be changed 10%, all humans might stop to exist within a matter of years. Changing gravity 10%. So a gravitational constant links the entire universe. And it's present in this turtleneck. Now, we're not trained to think that way. We're trained to think in boxes. This is my turtleneck, and it's me, and it doesn't belong to anyone else. But that's not science. How can it not belong to anyone else? How can you not belong to anyone else if your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents had not chosen to have sex on that particular night, you and your whole family doesn't exist? Seems like you're pretty connected to time, to space, to ecology in an interconnected framework. But we draw this circle not because it tells the full story of our interconnectivity, but because it's all we can hold. And then our cult tells a narrative within that circle. These are boundaries. That's not us, this is us. Of course, it's rather troubling that the coronavirus can be invented by someone who's not us, and then suddenly all of our schools are shutting down and trillions of dollars in the economy are lost. Troubling, isn't it? Because they're not us, they're the Chinese, and we're us. That's not actually how reality works. It's troubling if we say this is our river because it happens to flow through this boundary at this particular point. That if the upstream country puts dioxins in the river, our people die. It's troubling that the Japanese put radiation into the entire globe because of something they did over there. See, reality is ecological. It's holistic. But cults are myopic. And to maintain a cult, you've got to be dogmatic and stupid. Because there is no logical, intelligent framework for justifying the cult's dogmas. Whether it's saying I'm fine when you're not fine, whether it's everyone agreeing to not have feelings at work, or whatever it is, it makes absolutely no sense. It is pathological insanity. So here's our little box, and this is us, and this is not us. That's a lie, of course. It's an invention. But it makes us feel comfortable. So we do it. Now, what happens with this part that's outside the system? It has an innate connection with what is inside the system. The uninvited guest has an innate connection with the invited guests. The disremembered family memory or person has an innate mathematical connection with the remembered and honored person. The black sheep has as much ecological impact on the family, if not more, than the presidential candidate or whoever is high-ranking in the cult of the family. They are intimately and inextricably connected. Now, what happens when you impose the illusion of a barrier between this system and this system? Well, let's imagine that there's a water flow, and the water flow is coming in and going into the system and then going out of the system. But you're dogmatic, right? So you have your little cult, so you're going to say, no, that water is staying there, it's not part of us, nothing's coming in. Well, of course, you start to get drought. But you also, this water doesn't just vanish because of your stupidity. This water begins forming against a dam. You have to build a dam, and more energy has to be filled to maintain the illusion of separation. Now, as you maintain those structures, it takes more and more energy to damage the whole ecological framework. Because even if you deny that there's a connection, then why are you building all this wall if there's no connection? So there is an ecological connection between the two. And there is a high price for maintaining the illusion of this boundary. Now, the energy that is kept separate from a system, the energy that is excluded from a system, is seeking wholeness. The universe is seeking healing and wholeness. The universe is seeking life, which is to be whole in an integrated sphere with grace. It's the nature of life. It's seeking to be whole, to heal, to be one. That's the program. Now, the conscious mind of the uninitiated cult is dividing the whole and saying, this is not me and this is me. In doing so, there's an erection of a barrier, which takes energy. It's not very intelligent because now you're spending energy to make things worse. It takes energy. But the conscious mind is dependent on that boundary to feel a sense of existence. Because the conscious mind cannot grasp the entirety of all that is. It's overwhelmed. So the conscious mind is protecting its identity as a fractal representation of the cult in the face of the unknown, in the face of the feminine, in the face of the whole. However, there is an energetic static between that which is excluded and that which is included. That which is left outside the system will seek to destroy the system that leaves it out, as part of the universal program to be whole. So, for example, when I was like 11 years old, 10, 11 years old, I couldn't stand my sister. And she was 2 years younger than me. She was very cute, very winning, very pretty. And anywhere I went, I was a natural leader in my community in England. And anywhere that I went, she would follow. Because I would say, "Don't follow me." So, of course, she wanted to be there. And I was furious and fed up. And I would try and get rid of her. I'd say, "Okay, what do you want to do?" She would say something. And I'd say, "Okay, anyone who wants to go with Juliana, go do that with her. But we're not doing that. We're doing this." And if she couldn't get everyone to come with her and exclude me, then she would tag along and she would try and undermine everything that we were doing. So if I said, "Let's get our bikes, we're going this," she'd say, "Well, why do we have to do this? And why?" So her whole function was to destroy the power structure that was excluding her. And I want to suggest that this is a healthy part of human nature, because it's not healthy to have power structures based on exclusion. Now, it's always the minorities that are excluded, and this is a problem for evolution, because the majority has never been correct in the entire history of humanity, because evolution occurs on a bell curve. So this is how change occurs. Someone develops a microchip, and at first it's one person. That's a minority. And no one will fund them. They all think they're crazy. Everyone tries to kill them. Financially, socially, whatever. "You idiot, this is, you can read the biographies of all major innovations, be it Edison, be it Gates, be it Apple. No, no one, a computer in every household. That was Microsoft's mission." So every minority starts with one person, and then becomes two, and it's three. And it's still a minority until, it could be 1 million people. But in 1 billion, there's still a minority. And the minorities are always what gets excluded in a system. The blacks, the women, the poor, whatever. Because at some point, if it's the majority, usually the minority revolts if they're excluded from their own party, so to speak. So it's usually minorities that are treated worst, because cults are stupid. We haven't grasped the fact that in the next 50 years, the things that will bring well-being and value to every citizen on this planet are now languoring in a tormented minority's mind, without support, with cruel, dehumanizing, devaluing ignorance and exclusion. That's what's going on right now, and it's gone on throughout history. Some of our millions of homeless individuals have ideas and technologies that could evolve our culture faster than anyone who owns a mansion or whatever. But we're not interested, because we're bigoted. We think that money is more important than people, and these people are poor. So by definition, they know things that we don't know, but we're not interested. By definition, the Indians knew, or the Native Americans knew things we didn't know, and we weren't interested either. And we pay the price. And so by the time that something has been adopted by the majority in a bell curve of change, there is already a new minority with a superior technology that is being suppressed again by the new majority. And so this is the process of an uneducated cult evolving. So back to Sleeping Beauty. The aunt that is not invited to the christening, to the blessing and acknowledgement of the birth, is asked to be invisible. That's why she's not invited. Nobody wants Sleeping Beauty to understand that part of her and part of her family is outside the cult's memes. Now, in the story, the aunt is angry about being excluded, and so she curses Sleeping Beauty. What the mathematics says is that Sleeping Beauty was cursed the moment she was excluded, because the curse is the illusionary boundary between all of who she is and who she's supposed to be conscious of. And the mathematics of consciousness say that that which is excluded from awareness is disrespected. Respect. To see and see again. If you don't see something, you can't honor. Honor. To be changed, to attune to what is seen. If I see you and I bow to you, what I'm doing is I'm saying, I see you, you exist. If I don't see you and bang into you, I'm disrespecting and thus dishonoring. I'm not seeing you, and then I'm violating you because I don't see you. That which is violated always violates us. That's the mathematics of the deal. See, you don't get to bump into someone without them bumping into you. It's the same bump. When the relatives exclude Sleeping Beauty's aunt, they are excluding part of the psyche and the family consciousness. When they exclude part of the psyche and the family consciousness, they are disrespecting it. They're not seeing it. When they don't see it, they dishonor it. When they dishonor it, they bump into it. And the bump hurts both sides equally. You don't get to bump and say, okay, you were bumped, but you weren't. No, this is a mutual bump. For this bump to occur, you've got to be here, and this part has got to bang into you as if it didn't exist. The christening is trying to take place within a cult framework as if the old aunt doesn't exist. And the curse occurs the moment that information is suppressed, the moment she is not invited. And what's the curse? Sleeping Beauty goes to sleep for 100 years. When an event in the family system or the cult system is frozen and excluded from the debate, suppressed, controlled, denied, minimized, discounted, whitewashed, and buried underground, it curses the debate. And mathematically speaking, what is excluded from the system will seek to undermine the system. So that's how the mathematics actually work. Now, you can kind of see where human consciousness is going from. You have the totality of the sphere, and then you have a trilateral consciousness, a triad of consciousness. You have three distinctions, maybe good, bad, and in the middle, and that's your operating system. So you've got 1, 2, and 3 phases. Very, very bumpy ride. Now, as you create more and more complexity, you also have a lot of violence. You see, because this triangle is excluding 50% of the sphere, which means that 50% of the sphere is pitted against the other, so it's very violent. Now, this geometric shape is 3 times more sophisticated, more complex than the triangle. And so there's more of the sphere included in this symmetrical layout. So the ride is noticeably less bumpy. But nonetheless, these little slivers between the conscious structure and the reality itself that cannot be contained within the conscious structure, these little slivers of minority are always oppressed, hurt, and seeking to break the boundary down of the structure in order to get into the circle, to belong, to be acknowledged as an equal and essential part of the energy field. Now, the people inside the system are fighting to maintain the status quo and maintain the system. Because if the system breaks down, they're afraid of the feminine. They're afraid of chaos. They're afraid of infinity. They're afraid of the unconsciousness, and they cannot grasp the totality. So the majority that is inside a complex, somewhat functioning system is always fighting the minorities that are trying to break down the barriers so that the minority can be a part of the system, be honored as part of the system, because the majority is afraid of change and afraid of the chaos and thus terror, the terror of chaos, which is the re-entering the traumatic terrain of the child. The law of mass governs. If 90% of a population is satisfied with a cult system, and 10% of the people are very dissatisfied, the system will stay in place because we're dealing with the law of mass. 10% of people are trying to pull down the walls that define the system, and 90% of people are pushing them up, saying, don't expose us to chaos, complexity, and the unknown. The infinite is the totally complex sphere, but it is unconscious. You have to evolve. The way to evolve towards complexity and still stay humanly conscious is to just keep knocking off the points, validating more and more aspects outside the system and evolving the system. If you keep making the system more and more complex and more conscious, as it becomes more and more complex, the system can remain conscious, can remain human, and becomes more and more graceful. If you just destroy the system, then you are flooded with chaos and terror and trauma, and then you start crude again and start making it more sophisticated. So what happens in civil war and revolutions is a majority lacks empathy for a minority, so the minority gets louder and louder and louder. And then there's a battle where the majority will not honor the minority, so the minority will not honor the structures of the majority. And they go to war, and then they both collapse down. And then they start building again a crude system, and again, as they build the system, a new people will come into power, etc. Any part of the system that is excluded becomes a drag that mathematically will attack the bit that is excluding it, which is the boundary, the concept. That's not really real, it just exists in our mind. So this is important just to understand. Everything the conscious mind can conceive dishonors some part of reality that will seek to undermine the system that excludes it. Every single thing, every concept, every system that the human mind can conceive dishonors some part of the reality, the underlying totality of the sphere, that will seek to undermine the system that excludes it. So the moment the relatives didn't invite the aunt in Sleeping Beauty was the moment that the part of the psyche represented by that aunt as the old witch sought to undermine the christening and put Sleeping Beauty to sleep, because you cannot evolve a system until you are conscious of it. And you can't be conscious of it when you don't talk about it. You can't talk about it if it's taboo. So the taboos of a cult ensure the cycle of violence. Evil is that which threatens the system we define as good. So in this framework, here's the totality, here's the system, and then outside the system is energy that seeks to undermine the system that we've simplistically created. And in doing so, frightens us. It frightens us. And so we call it evil, because it's de-evolving the system in a way that restores the ecology to an unconscious purity. It's, if we take all these lines out, we have the symmetry of the perfect sphere. But we're not conscious of it. And so in the So you could see the conscious mind as a descent into suffering as we overlay a simplistic map of or paradigm of reality on top of the fabric of reality in such a way that by definition excludes part of who we are because everything is interconnected. So what we're excluding is parts of ourselves in the larger sense that we've lost connection with. And in doing so, we have a battle with ourselves that creates pain. Pain creates awareness of the flaw in the design. And so then we seek to refine the design to include more. Evil is that which threatens the system we define as good, but also teaches. You get to know things. You become conscious of that which you are in opposition. And what you're becoming conscious of is yourself in the larger probability field. But not the self that we know, the self that we forgot when we developed the language of the cult to define who we are. We forgot all that is outside the cult boundary. When a child can make every sound in the song, that's outside the set. So you forget that. And then you say the. And you remember the. I don't know how to repeat that sound. It's too big. It's too complex. But I can remember the. Isn't it wonderful? We take the beauty of possibility and reduce it down to something that we can repeat and grasp. The uninvited guest is cursed and curses the gathering that curses it. Now, pain teaches the faults in the system and in its design. Now, when you exclude energy by dividing a boundary here, when you exclude the flow of energy, that which is excluded starts to show symptoms of the mathematical impact of exclusion. For example, if I deny oxygen to, let's just say that I'm an autocratic body owner, and so I take the whole of the planet, the whole of the body, and I decide I'm putting sanctions on this finger. This finger is not going to have support because this finger doesn't do what it's told. I told it to go down, but it's sticking up, right? It's anomalous. It is a minority. It is a dissenting voice. So I'm going to cut it off with global sanctions. No more oxygen. So I tie a little string around it, and the finger starts to go blue. If I keep doing this, the finger will fall off, right? That's really taught it a lesson, right? But now I can't use that finger. 1. 2. My whole body is vulnerable to infection, including the other fingers that did what they were told. This is the problem with these limited boundaries of self, is we're fighting and we're dealing with ourselves through dysfunctional cult-like paradigms. And in doing so, what we do is we turn the excluded parts of the system dark. They start to go blue because we're controlling flow of energy into this sector of the self. We've disowned it first, and then we're punishing it or dishonoring it or not listening to it the way we're listening to stuff in here. So this starts to suffer. Now, when they ask, why am I suffering? The obvious answer is because of this wall. The wall is the cult. Now, the more parts that start to go dark, the more parts are hurting. There's dis-ease with these boundaries. Now, you cannot just cut off And the more parts that go dark, the more parts go into resistance. Now, if you identify with being one of these dark parts, do you like the system that created this wall? Of course not, because you were healthy until that line cut off your blood supply. Now, these are lines that say that because of this race, you can't do this. Because you didn't have the education, you can't do this. Because you are too young, you can't do this. Because you're too old, you can't do this. All of these cult lines that we invent out of nowhere and then cling to for dear life for some sense of normalcy and certainty cut off flows of energy. And the people who experience occupying the segments of the psyche, the segments of the cult, that are cut off from life, from evolution, from growth, because of those lines, mathematically, instinctively, mentally, emotionally, and ultimately physically, stop being loyal to the system that's killing them. Stop being loyal to the system that is diminishing them, and become loyal to a vision that includes them. So these parts are the parts that are cut off because of the stupidity of the cult are always the visionaries who envision a new system that includes them. So they're the ones who say, no, let's define the cult this way, because this includes this. Now, notice no cult is perfect, so they didn't include this part. Now, this part will go dark and start fighting against the expanded system. But this is the process of evolution. We give it a stab, and we always fail. And then we deteriorate into civil war and collapse, or the majority is intelligent enough to stop fighting the minority and is willing to change the system. So we're dealing with that with transgender and homosexuality in the U.S. and all the various words which I'm not culturally, politically correct about. I just know there's a lot of various gender, this and that and the other. But basically, the cult has been saying, no, marriage is this, and that's the way it is. And a growing number of minorities are saying, no, that doesn't include me. I want to be included in my country. I'm paying taxes. Why don't I get the same rank as in here? And so there's either a civil war in which both sides destroy portions of themselves, or there's a successful advocacy for including with honor the parts of the cult that weren't included before, because that's the only way to have peace. You cannot have peace between this finger and the rest of the body if this finger's oxygen is being cut off and gradually withering. If this finger has a conscious mind, it will start trying to kill the brain that's tying up its life. Maybe in a stalemate, just saying, if I die, you die. And there's a certain intelligence in that. Because if I die, killing the system of thought that made sure I died, perhaps a more sophisticated system will be born in the vacuum. So that's an important part of things. What I also want to look at is psychologically, we're talking at citizen levels, but psychologically, if we look at things like hatred, there is a mathematics of impact. So if I cause you traumatic levels of suffering deliberately and respond and refuse to respond to your helplessness and grief, you will feel hatred as hope and innocence is replaced by bitterness and rage and hatred. Because I'm excluding your needs and your feelings about certain things. I'm excluding that, and I have superior mass in that context, and so you will feel hatred. That is an equation. So let's say I hurt a third of you, and so a third of you hates me. Now, in an emotionally and psychologically illiterate cult, you'll just move on or you'll have revenge or something. But there's hatred generated in the equation mathematically. Now, this is very important to deal with in understanding that the parts that come to hate, let's say a third. Let's say in many cultures where you have high levels of chauvinism, let's say the man dishonors 1/3 of his wife as a cult protocol. So this part of the wife is fine. This part is fine. This part is fine. But this part is unwelcome. This part I hit. This part I betray. This part I do not honor. Well, 1/3 of that archetypal woman will hate not only the man, but the cult that produced him, which includes other women, because it's remarkable how participatory women are in raising chauvinistic men, without thinking. When you start teaching a boy and behaving as a mother the way you would honor the chauvinistic boundaries, you teach the boy to be a chauvinist, or it makes mom uncomfortable. And this, the hypocrisy of this can be very clear. I mean, you can find mothers all around the world telling their sons that it's fine to violate other girls and not parent their children that they have out of wedlock or whatever, because that's fine. That's their boy is doing that. The mother's boy shouldn't be locked down into marriage by that little hussy. That's not good enough for you, right? So the mother teaches the boy to be a chauvinist. And then the boy grows up and is chauvinistic to the women, including his mother. And so there's, but there will be 1/3, maybe the mother who teaches the boy to be chauvinistic towards other women won't make the connection. In a simplistic cult, you don't, with why the son lacks respect for her. Like, I let you abuse all those other women, why don't you respect me? Because there's not the understanding of the archetypal message. Because the brain is a sanity-seeking machine. So if the brain grasps that feminine energy is less than masculine energy, which is the primary message of chauvinism, and his mother teaches him that feminine energy is less than masculine energy, that's not a personal equation. So if his mother is highly feminine, he will always view her as less important than masculine, unless there is a conflict and a cultural override that says you always have to respect your mother, even though she's a woman. So then you have a bit of code written on top of that protects the mother from the chauvinism she's bred in her son. But the part that feels hatred will undermine the marriage and the culture that produces it, with all kinds of things: suicide, addiction, lies, betrayal, sulking, refusing to participate, not showing up fully. You cannot get around the mathematics of impact. And so the most important thing in these equations is to make them conscious and to get out of cult paradigm and into mathematical paradigm. Because you don't get to decide to have a positive attitude about hate.